The snow should have been deeper. At this elevation, late winter usually pressed itself into the mountain, sealing surfaces, smoothing angles, quieting everything that moved across it. Passes like this became predictable once covered, hard crust on top, resistance beneath, sound muted by depth. This pass was different. The Wolverine reached it under a sky that could not decide what it wanted to be. High cloud moved quickly, breaking sunlight into uneven patches that warmed rock without touching snow for long. Wind poured through the saddle relentlessly, stripping accumulation as soon as it formed. Nothing stayed. Snow lay thin and restless, skittering across exposed stone in dry sheets, collecting briefly in hollows before lifting again. What remained never settled long enough to become reliable. The Wolverine stopped at the edge of the pass and lifted his head. Wind struck him full in the face, flattening the fur along his neck and shoulders, carrying scent away faster than it could be read. Smell meant little here. This place erased information. He moved anyway. Wolverines did not wait for conditions to improve. They adjusted to conditions that refused to. His body stayed low, heavy chest forward, legs short but powerful, claws biting into a mix of frozen soil, ice, and bare stone. Each step produced a different response. Crunch, scrape, slip, never the same twice. The ground did not agree with itself. One moment, a thin crust held just long enough to support his weight. The next, it collapsed, dropping a paw into loose powder that had no depth, only movement. Snow hissed and slid away, exposing rock polished by wind. The Wolverine adjusted instantly, redistributing weight, digging claws into whatever resisted least. He did not hurry. Speed on unstable ground created mistakes. Progress came from pressure applied patiently, relentlessly, without expectation of consistency. Halfway across the pass, the wind intensified. It rose without warning, tearing across the saddle and lifting snow into the air until visibility flattened. The landscape lost depth. Distance collapsed into white motion and grey stone. The Wolverine turned slightly sideways, presenting less surface to the gusts, and continued forward without pausing. Stopping here meant losing heat. Losing heat meant stiffness. Stiffness meant injury. Snow rattled against his fur and face, driven horizontally, finding seams between guard hairs and undercoat. His body absorbed it, heat pushing back steadily. Beneath him, the ground shifted again. A slab of ice cracked under his weight, not breaking fully, but tilting just enough to throw balance outward. The Wolverine stumbled one step, claws scraping hard, then recovered immediately, muscles bunching as he forced himself forward rather than back. Behind him, the slab slid free. It accelerated downslope, breaking apart as it went, dragging loose snow with it. The sound was brief and final, swallowed quickly by wind. The pass did not correct him, it did not warn him either. This was not avalanche country, not dramatic, not sudden. It was worse, it was ground that never finished becoming anything. Snow that never decided to hold or fall, surface that demanded constant negotiation. The Wolverine moved through it steadily. He did not look down, he did not look back. The far side of the pass remained partially visible through drifting snow, darker rock, less exposed, a slope where accumulation might finally stay long enough to matter. That was enough. Crossing the pass was not about safety, it was about continuation. Territory, food, distance, all of it required movement through places that offered no stability. The snow never settled, so neither did the Wolverine. He crossed with his body angled into wind and uncertainty, knowing that here, survival was not decided by single failures, but by how long one could continue across ground that refused to become solid. The smell reached him before the ground changed. It cut through the wind unevenly, arriving in fragments that made no sense at first. A trace of fat, a metallic edge, something old but not useless. The Wolverine slowed without stopping, head lifting slightly as he tested the air again. Carrion. not fresh, but not taken. In terrain like this, nothing stayed hidden for long. Snow that never settled, also never buried completely. What it covered, it revealed again moments later. The Wolverine followed the scent uphill toward a shallow depression on the leeward side of the pass. Wind slackened there just enough to allow accumulation, not snow, but information. Smell pooled briefly, then scattered again. He moved carefully now, not because of danger, but because of competition. Carrion drew attention. Even here, even now, others would arrive. Birds first, then mammals, then anything large enough to take by force. The remains lay exposed between two slabs of rock. A mountain goat, or what was left of one. The body had broken during a fall, not a kill. Bones lay twisted at unnatural angles, hide torn where impact had split it open. Snow drifted over parts of it, then slid away again, leaving patches alternately hidden and exposed. The Wolverine stopped several body lengths away. He did not rush. Carrion this old carried history, who had fed already, who had claimed it briefly, who might return. He circled downwind first, reading the space rather than the carcass itself. No wolf, no bear, no large cat. Birds had been here. Their light work showed in stripped tissue and scattered feathers nearby, but no heavy jaw marks cut into bone yet. The carcass was not owned. The Wolverine moved in. He tore into the body immediately, not delicately, not slowly. Time mattered more than comfort. His jaws closed around frozen flesh and pulled hard, ripping loose a slab of meat that had resisted smaller scavengers. He ate standing. Snow blew across his back, melting slowly against his heat. Blood darkened the rock beneath him, then froze again in thin, glossy streaks as wind cooled it instantly. Halfway through the second mouthful, the wind shifted. Scent changed. Another presence. The Wolverine froze mid-chew, head lifting, ears flattening slightly as he tested the air again. The smell was faint, scattered by gusts, but unmistakable. Raven, above, then another. Their calls came seconds later, sharp, intelligent sounds that carried far. Ravens did not threaten Wolverines, but they announced food to everything else. The Wolverine ate faster. He tore deeper, prioritizing dense muscle and fat, swallowing without pause. Bones cracked under his jaws, marrow released quickly before cold could steal it again. The wind brought another smell, fainter, heavier, canid, not close, but moving. The Wolverine did not leave immediately. This was his advantage, taking risk where others hesitated. He fed until the cost began to outweigh the gain, until his body told him enough energy had been taken to justify the time spent exposed. He backed away from the carcass suddenly, without ceremony. No attempt to hide it, no claim. Ownership here lasted only until challenged. He moved downslope, angling away from the depression and into more broken ground where scent shattered quickly and tracks failed to form. Snow slid and shifted under his paws, erasing shape almost as soon as it appeared. Behind him, ravens descended fully now, black shapes against white chaos, tearing at what remained and calling loudly. The canid would arrive soon. The Wolverine did not care. He had taken what mattered. As he moved on, the wind intensified again, stripping snow from stone and flattening surface detail until the ground looked newly exposed. Any sign of his passage dissolved almost immediately. This was the advantage of snow that never settled. Nothing stayed, not scent, not tracks, not ownership. The Wolverine crossed onward, heavier now, but no safer, carrying energy forward through terrain that refused to remember who had passed through it or what had been taken there. And behind him, the pass returned to motion and noise, erasing the brief moment when food had existed long enough to matter. Darkness arrived unevenly. It did not fall all at once, but pooled in the low places first, filling hollows and cuts in the land while the higher ridges still caught strips of fading light. The pass lost depth again, becoming a flattened plain of moving snow and dark stone. Temperature dropped quickly. The wind did not stop, but it cooled, losing whatever softness it had carried earlier. Snow that had slid and whispered now rasped across rock in harder, sharper sheets. The Wolverine felt the change through his pores immediately, ice tightening, surfaces becoming slick without becoming stable. The carcass was behind him now. Its smell faded fast, torn apart by wind and distance. Whatever conflict might have followed it would happen without him. Night erased consequence here faster than daylight ever could. The Wolverine continued forward, not searching, not resting. Movement was insulation. He followed no visible trail. There was none. Snow never stayed long enough to mark direction. Even rock faces looked different under low light, shadows shifting constantly as cloud passed across the moon. Navigation came from memory and angle. He kept the wind quartering across his body, using it as reference. He tracked slope with his shoulders and hips, feeling where the ground began to drop more consistently. The far side of the pass would fall away more gently. That was enough guidance. A misstep came suddenly. His right forepaw landed on what looked like snow-packed ground and instead found air. The surface collapsed instantly, dropping his weight into a shallow void where wind had undercut accumulation. His chest slammed against hard ice beneath, breath forced out in a sharp burst. He recovered immediately. Claws bit into stone, hind legs drove forward. The void collapsed fully behind him, snow and ice sloughing off and disappearing downslope with a brief hiss. The Wolverine stood still only long enough to confirm nothing else was moving. Pain existed. It did not matter yet. Cold would decide later whether it mattered at all. He moved again, altering his line slightly, favouring exposed stone over deceptive snow. The wind scoured those surfaces clean. What it revealed, at least, was real. Sound changed at night. Everything carried farther, thinner. The scrape of his claws echoed faintly against rock. Snow striking his fur sounded louder than it was, but there were no other steps, no answering movement. He was alone on the pass. Midway through the night, the wind shifted direction. It did not bring scent. It brought silence. Snow stopped moving for several long minutes, settling just enough to give the illusion of stability. The Wolverine slowed instinctively. Still, snow was often the most dangerous. It hid weakness beneath smoothness. He tested each step. Some held. Some collapsed softly, without sound, swallowing his paws before releasing them again. The ground felt unfinished, as if it could not decide whether to be surface or void. The wind returned abruptly. Snow lifted again, erasing whatever structure had begun to form. The illusion vanished, replaced by honest instability. The Wolverine preferred this. Chaos that announced itself was easier to move through than calm that lied. Near the end of the pass, the slope finally changed character. Stone rose more frequently through the snow. Wind slackened slightly as the land curved downward. Accumulation lingered a little longer here, beginning to gather in the lee of larger rock. The Wolverine slowed, not to rest, to confirm. His body was stiff now, muscles loaded and cold, but functional. Fat taken earlier burned steadily, producing heat that his thick fur held efficiently. He could afford caution here. Behind him, the pass continued to move and erase itself. No trail marked his crossing. No sign lingered of where he had stumbled, where he had fed, where he had nearly fallen. By morning, even the raven's disturbance would be gone. The snow never settled. And because of that, neither did consequence. The Wolverine descended into deeper shadow, toward ground that might finally hold long enough to allow rest, knowing that when dawn came, the pass would look untouched, indifferent, as if nothing had crossed it at all. The slope beyond the pass changed gradually. There was no clear line where instability ended and structure returned. Instead, the land began to offer resistance more consistently, rock faces larger and more continuous, snow collecting in defined pockets rather than scattering endlessly. Wind weakened, no longer able to strip everything it touched. The Wolverine felt it immediately. Each step answered with something predictable. Snow compressed instead of fleeing. Stone stayed where it was. The ground, for the first time since the climb began, behaved as if it expected weight. He slowed. Not because he was safe, but because safety no longer needed to be forced through movement alone. His body loosened slightly, shoulders lowering, stride shortening as energy shifted from persistence to assessment. Here, scent returned. Not clearly, but enough to matter. Old tracks surfaced briefly where snow had settled long enough to hold shape. Faint lines of passage crossed the slope, ungulates moving downslope days earlier. A fox line threading between rocks, birds hopping and lifting again. The land remembered. The Wolverine followed the descent without hurry, choosing routes that angled between drifts and exposed ground, conserving effort now that the need for constant correction had eased. Fat burned slower. Breath steadied. At a lower shelf, he stopped. The wind barely touched this place. Snow lay deeper here, not packed, not drifting, simply present. He dug briefly with his forepaws, hollowing a shallow depression against a rock face where heat could be held and sightlines remained open. He lay down. Not fully, just enough. Rest came in fragments, muscles releasing in stages, awareness narrowing but never closing. The cold pressed in, but his body pushed back steadily, heat pooling beneath thick fur and dense muscle. Above him, the pass continued to erase itself. Snow moved, wind scoured, nothing marked where he had crossed or what he had taken there. The mountain offered no record. Below him, the slope held. This was territory again, not stable, not gentle, but legible. It allowed patterns to form, routes to repeat, movement to mean something beyond survival. The Wolverine rose after a short while and continued down slope. There was food ahead, there were boundaries to test, there would be conflict again, later, somewhere else. The pass had been a place where snow never settled and nothing stayed. This side of it remembered just enough. And the Wolverine moved into that memory without pause, carrying no sign of what the mountain had refused to keep, only the momentum of having crossed ground that did not care whether he succeeded and did not change when he did.